Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to tackle another brain-bending topic.
Always up for a good mental workout.
All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're diving headfirst into a question that's probably crossed everyone's mind at some point, especially if you've ever spent any time hitting the books. Is it really better to study in the morning or burn the midnight oil? You know, the age-old battle of morning versus night studying.
Well, that's a good one. It seems like such a straightforward question, but trust me, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. I mean, we dug into some really fascinating research for this, and it gets surprisingly complex. We're talking about how our bodies work, how our brains tick, all this intertwined stuff. We're exploring your body's internal clock, looking at when your brain's really firing on all cylinders, how distractions mess with us, even how our individual personalities factor in.
It's really about getting personalized here. We're not just giving generic advice. We want to help you understand what's going to work best for you specifically. So we'll be breaking down the science behind these internal clocks, these circadian rhythms, exploring whether you're a morning person or a night owl, and seeing how all these things affect how much you remember, how productive you are, all the good stuff.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not just harder, right? Finding that sweet spot where your brain's naturally primed to soak up knowledge. I mean, who wouldn't want to study more effectively?
Let's start with the basics. What exactly are these circadian rhythms we keep hearing about? They sound kind of like a sci-fi concept.
Well, they are pretty incredible when you think about it. Picture this internal clock ticking away inside you, controlling all sorts of things without you even realizing it. It's a roughly 24-hour cycle that regulates a whole bunch of biological processes.
Like what kind of processes? I mean, besides just making us feel tired or awake?
It's way more than that. It affects your energy levels, how alert you feel, the release of different hormones, even your digestion. And of course, the big one for us today, it plays a huge role in how well your brain functions. Think of it as your body's master conductor, keeping everything in sync.
Okay, so it's kind of like this underlying rhythm that's influencing so much of what's going on in our bodies. Is there a typical pattern that most people experience, like a general schedule for this internal clock?
You know, there is. It generally follows a predictable pattern. In the morning, your body starts pumping out cortisol, which is often called the stress hormone. But it also gives you that boost of alertness you need to get going. So it's like your body's natural shot of espresso. Then, as the day goes on, your body temperature gradually rises, usually peaking in the late afternoon. For some people, there's this second wave of focus around that time. And then, as evening rolls in, your body starts releasing melatonin, the sleep hormone, signaling it's time to wind down.
Right, so that classic pattern of waking up, hitting peak productivity in the afternoon, and then getting tired as the day ends, it seems pretty universal. But you mentioned that there's some individual variation in this, right? Why isn't everyone on the same schedule?
You got it. That's where things get interesting. We're not all cookie-cutter copies. This is where the concept of chronotypes comes into play. It's basically your natural preference for when you like to sleep and be active.
So some people are just wired to be early birds, and others are more like night owls. How do these chronotypes affect our study habits? I mean, is it really that big of a deal?
Oh, it can make a world of difference. Think of it like this. If you're a morning lark, you're naturally going to be more alert and focused in the morning. Your brain's firing on all cylinders, ready to absorb information. But if you're a night owl, trying to force yourself to study at 6 a.m. is like swimming upstream. Your brain's just not ready yet.
That makes sense. I've definitely had those mornings where my brain felt like it was still half asleep. So understanding our chronotype is important, but what about the cognitive side of things? What's actually happening in our brains when we study at different times of the day? Like, are there specific advantages to studying in the morning?
Absolutely. Morning study often comes with some pretty sweet perks. Your brain's typically refreshed after a good night's sleep, so you're more likely to feel alert, focused, and ready to think critically. This is especially helpful for tasks that require problem solving, analytical thinking, really digging into a topic.
It sounds like morning's the time to tackle those tough subjects. So, what about night owls? Are they just doomed to struggle?
Not at all. Night owls have their own strengths.
Mm.
In fact, a lot of people find that their creativity peaks in the evening. As the day winds down and the pressure's off, they can relax a bit and let their minds wander. This can be prime time for brainstorming, thinking outside the box, any kind of creative work, really.
It's interesting how our brains seem to have different strengths that emerge at different times. Now, I remember reading that sleep after learning helps solidify memories. How does this play into the whole morning versus night study debate?
That's a great point. Sleep is absolutely crucial for memory consolidation. It's like hitting the save button on what you've learned. So as you study at night and then get a good night's sleep, it can really help cement that information in your brain. But here's the catch. You have to actually sleep. Pulling all-nighters completely defeats the purpose. It's like studying for hours and then forgetting to save your work.
Okay, sleep is key, but I still want to know more about these chronotypes. Can we define them a bit more clearly? Like, what exactly makes someone a lark or an owl?
Sure. Think of it as your body's natural inclination. Morning larks, or early chronotypes, are those people who naturally wake up early, feel energized in the morning, and get tired earlier in the evening. They're the ones who bounce out of bed ready to go. Night owls or late chronotypes are the opposite. They struggle to wake up early, feel groggy in the morning, but then their energy and focus really kick in later in the day. They often stay up late and are most productive at night.
It's like some people are programmed for sunrise and others are wired for the moonlight. What have researchers learned about how these chronotypes affect our ability to learn? I mean, does it really make that much of a difference if you're studying at your right time?
Big time. Sleep experts, people like Dr. Michael Broas and Dr. Till Roenneberg, have found that if you try to force yourself to study when your body's not ready, it can seriously backfire. You'll likely be less efficient, and you won't retain as much information. It's like trying to run a marathon on an empty stomach. You're just not setting yourself up for success.
So trying to cram for an exam at 3 a.m. when you're naturally a morning person is probably not the best idea.
Not ideal. It's much better to work with your body's natural rhythm. Study when you're naturally more alert and focused. You'll be surprised how much easier it is to learn and retain information that way.
So much of this comes down to understanding ourselves better, right? Knowing when our brains are primed for learning. Now, speaking of learning, let's talk about memory retention. We know sleep is important, but are there specific times of day when our brains are better at holding on to new information?
There's some really interesting research on this. It seems like different types of memory are stronger at different times of day. Declarative memory, which is basically remembering facts and information, tends to be stronger in the morning. That's because the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for encoding this type of memory, is usually at its sharpest after you've rested.
So morning's the time to memorize those historical dates or vocabulary words. What about things like learning new skills or mastering a technique?
That's where procedural memory comes in. This is the kind of memory involved in learning things like playing a musical instrument or mastering a software program. Interestingly, some research suggests that this type of memory might actually be better learned in the evening.
Really? So maybe practicing your guitar riffs is more effective after dinner than first thing in the morning.
It's possible. It might have to do with increased activity of the motor cortex, the part of your brain that controls movement, later in the day. There's a lot more research to be done, but it's something to keep in mind.
I'm starting to see that the timing of our study sessions can really make a difference depending on what we're trying to learn. Now, we talked about that study where reviewing material right before bed improved memory. Can you remind us why that might be?
Oh yeah, that's a really cool study. It found that reviewing what you've learned right before you go to sleep can seriously boost your long-term retention, especially if you get a good night's sleep afterward. The idea is that during sleep, your brain's busy consolidating all that information you just reviewed, making those neural connections stronger.
So maybe a quick review of flashcards before bed isn't a bad idea. But I'm guessing this isn't the time to be trying to learn something completely new and complex, right?
Probably not. You don't want to overload your brain right before bed. It's more about reinforcing what you've already learned, giving your brain a chance to process it during sleep.
We've talked a lot about our internal clocks and how our brains function at different times, but what about the environment we're studying in? Doesn't that play a role too? I mean, I know I can't focus if there's a lot of noise or distractions around.
Oh, the environment is huge. Even if you're studying at your ideal time, if your surroundings are chaotic, it's going to be tough to concentrate. Mornings often have a natural advantage here. There are typically fewer distractions, less noise, people are still asleep or just starting their day. It's a quieter time in general.
Yeah, that peaceful morning quiet can be so conducive to focus. What about studying in the evening? Does that come with its own set of environmental challenges?
It can. Evenings can be quiet too, especially if you're in a household that settles down later in the day. But for some people, the challenge is fighting off fatigue after a long day or resisting the temptation to socialize or get sucked into their phones.
I can relate to that. It's so easy to get sidetracked, especially in the evening when you're already tired. So it's not just about finding your ideal study time based on your body clock. It's also about finding a time and place where you can minimize those external distractions, right?
Exactly. Sometimes those external factors can even outweigh your biological prime time. Like, if you're a morning person but your house is always noisy in the morning, you might actually be better off studying later in the day, even if it's not your peak time biologically.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where your internal clock and your environment are working together to create the best possible study conditions. Now, to make this more concrete, can you share some real-life examples of how people have found their ideal study time? Stories that bring this all to life.
I've got some good ones. Let's start with Sarah. She was a nursing student, and she was really struggling to memorize all those complicated anatomical terms. She tried a bunch of different things, and finally she figured out that waking up about an hour and a half before her first class and using that quiet morning time to review was a game changer. She found that the peace and quiet of the early morning, combined with her brain being fresh, was the perfect combo for memorization.
That's a great example of someone using that morning alertness to their advantage. Do you have an example of someone who found success studying later in the day?
Absolutely. There's Marcus. He was a graphic design major, and he found that his creative juices really flowed late at night. Something about those quiet, solitary hours really sparked his imagination. He felt less inhibited, more free to experiment with ideas. So he started tackling his big design projects at night, and that's when he produced his best work.
It just shows how different tasks might be better suited for different times of day. What about someone who doesn't have the luxury of choosing long blocks of time, like someone with a really busy schedule?
Oh, that's a good one. We looked at Tina, who was a working parent with a jam-packed schedule. She couldn't carve out big chunks of time, so she found a different way. She started studying in short, consistent bursts throughout the day, maybe a quick review of her notes on the train, some focused reading during her lunch break, and then another session after her kids were asleep. The key for her was finding those little pockets of time and making them count.
These stories are so inspiring. It really drives home the point that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's all about finding what works for you. Now, I'm thinking that for many people, the best approach might not be an all-or-nothing choice between morning and night. What about combining the two? Is there a way to do that effectively?
You bet. A hybrid approach can be really powerful. You might find that mornings are great for those more demanding tasks, like reviewing notes or tackling complex problems, while evenings are better for lighter stuff like summarizing what you've learned or doing some light reading.
So kind of like matching the task to your energy level and the time of day?
Precisely. You can even adjust your study times based on how you're feeling that day or that week. Maybe you're super focused on Mondays, but by Friday, your brain's fried. It's about being flexible and listening to your body.
Flexibility seems key. So, for our listener who's probably thinking, okay, this is all great, but how do I figure out my best study time? What are some actionable steps they can take? Where do they even begin?
The first step is to become a detective of your own energy. For a week or so, pay close attention to how you feel at different times of the day. Keep a little energy diary, either in a notebook or on your phone, and jot down when you feel most focused, alert, and when you feel sluggish or easily distracted.
So like creating your own personal energy map. What's next?
Once you have a sense of your natural energy patterns, start experimenting. Try studying the same type of material at different times of day. Maybe work on some practice problems in the morning, then try the same thing in the evening. See when you get more done, when you feel more engaged.
So put it to the test. But how do you know if you're actually remembering the information better at certain times?
Good question. That's where active recall and self-testing come in. After each study session, try to explain the concepts to yourself without looking at your notes, or test yourself with flashcards. Compare how well you remember the information from your morning session versus your evening session.
So see if the information is really sinking in, and don't forget about the environment.
Right. Pay attention to when you experience the fewest distractions. Is it early morning before everyone else is up? Late at night when the house is quiet? Find those times and places where you can truly focus.
Okay, so we've tracked our energy, experimented with different study times, tested our recall, and found our quiet zones. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
Once you've identified those sweet spots, build a routine around them. Make a habit of studying at those times, even if it's just for short bursts. Consistency is key. And remember, the whole point of this is to become more self-aware, to figure out what truly works best for you.
So, to summarize for everyone, morning study seems to favor clarity, logic, and structured thinking. Night study can boost creativity, reflection, and memory consolidation as long as you get enough sleep. And perhaps most importantly, get to know your chronotype, work with your natural rhythms, and personalize your study routine.
Don't be afraid to experiment. Find what works for you, and remember that the best study time is the one you can actually stick to and get results with, whether you're a morning lark, a night owl, or somewhere in between.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into the science of study timing. We hope you've gained some valuable insights into your own brain and how to make learning more effective.
If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to The Deep Dive, leaving a review, or sharing this with anyone else who might be on their own learning journey.
Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember that it's not just about when you study, but how you approach it. Intentional, engaged learning is what really makes the difference.